Hey folks, I'm Allison. Welcome to my booktube channel. Today's video is my TBR for September and October. I'm doing a sci-fi and fantasy themed fall. The first book on my list is Bury Our Bones in the Midnight Soil by V. Schwab. I am very excited about this book for two main reasons. The first one is that I absolutely love V. Schwab. I have read, I think, all of her other fantasy series. I've read the Darker Shade of Magic series, and I've read Addie LaRue, and I've read Vengeful and Vicious, and really loved all of them. So I'm very optimistic that this will also be a romp of a fantasy novel. Also, this book is about sapphic vampires, and I am so excited for that vibe. That is exactly what I'm feeling going into fall. And I have been kind of wanting to read a book about sapphic vampires for a while now, because I read a horror novel by Delilah S. Bloom called, I can't remember what it was called, but I thought that that book was going to be about sapphic vampires and was so excited, and then it was a totally different thing. I just completely misunderstood the premise of the book. And ever since then, I've been sort of thinking to myself, oh, I'd really love to read something about sapphic vampires. Enter Bury Our Bones in the Midnight Soil. This is an interesting book. I think it has multiple character perspectives and some pretty big time jumps, neither of which are aspects I typically enjoy in a novel. I think sometimes they can make the plot feel a little chaotic, and I often find myself more drawn to certain characters than others, and I get bored waiting for the characters that I don't care that much about. But V. Schwab has done multiple character perspectives definitely in the Darker Shade of Magic series, at least, and I always really enjoyed those. Actually, and in Vengeful and Vicious she did. I think she is talented enough to carry it off, so I'm very excited for this book. The next book on my list is The Devils by Joe Abercrombie. This is a book about essentially a little friend group, or a little gang of people who find each other and go on sort of a quest together through a dark urban fantasy realm. And the fantasy aspects of this book, I think, are subverted religious themes. So there's a holy order that has dark magic, and the group of protagonists are essentially, demons or devils. The inside cover has these absolutely beautiful sort of religious iconography kind of illustrations that I think is what the general atmosphere of the book is going to be like, this sort of subversion of religious themes and tropes. And I think that is such a fun theme for fantasy novels to play with. I'm very curious to see how this book goes. This is my first Joe Abercrombie book, and I thought that this would be a good intro to his writing, because everyone says that it's, at least what I've seen online, says that it's a little faster paced and a little more comedic and a little less dark than many of his other works. And I don't tend to like fantasy that is just so unrelentingly dark. I also don't tend to like books that are really gross, gory. And I think this is supposed to be a little less gory than some of his other works. So I'm optimistic that it will be a good intro, at least for me, to his writing, but I will have to see whether or not after reading this book I'm interested to pursue more of his work. The third fantasy heavy hitter on my list is Blood Over Brighthaven by M.L. Wang. This is supposed to be a relatively classic story arc, coming of age. The first woman joins this special prestigious order of mages, and she has to grow into her powers and unravel a conspiracy, and I think she falls in love with one of the other characters. But I also think the world building in this book and the way that the twists and turns unravel is supposed to be really incredible. I saw this book on so many people's best fantasy books of the year list, and many people had it as their #1 fantasy book of the year, including several big name fantasy authors. And so I'm very excited to check this out. Okay, the next book on my list is a pretty big vibe shift from the previous 3, and that is The Curious Incident of the Dog in the Nighttime by Mark Haddon. This is a book that I read in high school and remember really liking at the time, but I remember almost nothing about it. And I have been wanting to reread it recently because it has been ranked among the best books of the 21st century on several lists recently. You know, the New York Times put out that list and Goodreads put out a list, and it seemed like this book was getting a lot of praise and recognition. And yeah, and so I wanted to circle back and see basically if it holds up to how good I remember it being. This is, I believe, a book about a teenager with autism and his day-to-day life. He is, for some of the book, I think, sort of trying to solve the mystery of how a dead dog ended up in his neighbor's yard, but I don't remember the mystery aspect of this book really being that important to the book. What I remember about the book was that the character perspective was so unique and fascinating. And I'm really curious whether, you know, that is something that continues to hold true even in a media landscape where there's a lot more representation for folks on the autism spectrum, or whether it felt so interesting and unique to me at the time I was first reading it, because I don't imagine, I think I read this when I was maybe 14, and I probably had not ever read a book about someone with autism at that time. So yeah, excited to give this one a reread. So I'm coming to you from the future. The day after I filmed this video, I was in Barnes & Noble and I impulse bought The Will of the Many by James Islington. And it seemed like the perfect book to add to round out my list of sci-fi and fantasy books for fall. So I'm here to film the last little bit of this video and let you know that I'm adding this book to the list. I'm really excited about this book. I love a fat fantasy novel, and this is the first book in a series, so assuming the subsequent books come out, there will be a lot of hours of enjoyment I can get out of this book and its sequels. It's about a society where there's a will of the many, and it basically collects the wills of various people. They like agree to be part of this giant collective social will, and then they have to give up pieces of their will. And the main character is infiltrating the highest ranks of that society to try to bring it down. So really looking forward to reading this one. It's been everywhere all over the internet lately, so hopefully it will live up to the hype. So there you have it. Those are the 5 books that I'm planning to read in September and October. I hope that you enjoyed this video. If you'd like to hear more from me, please consider subscribing. And as always, thank you so much for spending some of your one wild and precious life with me watching this video.